You know, a lot of people, they don't realize that going and creating relationships is literally the process of making friends. If you want to get really, really good at sales, get really good at talking to somebody about stuff that seems totally unrelated and using it to build trust. You want to make sure that you are ABG and you are not keeping score, because as soon as you start doing that, you end up ruining your own relationships.
Your buddy was like push, push, push. So they were pushing back. You've learned skills to get them to pull you in. You've learned skills how to use human behavior to your advantage. All right, so wherever you're at today, whether you're driving down the road to your next sales appointment, or whether you're about to pick up the phone to call your prospect, or whether you're walking into a boardroom meeting to finalize a deal. Heck, right now you're probably finalizing deals on Zoom, wherever you're at, whatever state or country you're in. Wherever you're at right now, I want you to stop and really pay attention and ask yourself this question. What does it take? What does it really take to be a top 1% salesperson in your industry? Okay, what does it really take? Not just talk, what does it take? The salesperson who makes all the money, the salesperson who gets any promotion they want. They have the respect of owners and management teams in their company. They have the respect of everybody, including their prospects. Well, my next guest is going to answer that question for you. And let me give you a small taste of this gentleman's background. He was named by Forbes as one of the top 50 best relationship builders, and Inc. magazine dubbed him the quote unquote Larry King of podcasting. That's big. He's a former Wall Street lawyer who gave it all up to pursue the business of relationship building. And there is no one more qualified to teach you a thing or two about sales, influence, networking, skills of which he has mastered and used to impact millions of lives throughout the globe. He built his audience to more than 4 million downloads per month, and his new show, which he started from scratch in 2018, was quickly named Best of Apple and now generates 6.1 million downloads per month, maybe even more now. It's amazing. We'll ask him about that. Now, none of this should be a surprise, given his work ethic and his social dynamic skills which helped him close and interview some of the biggest names and personalities on the planet, including the late Kobe Bryant. Love that guy. Ray Dalio, hope I pronounced his name right. Malcolm Gladwell, Dennis Rodman, the man, T.I. Harris, and Mark Cuban. Love him on Shark Tank, just to name a few. He speaks 5 languages. What does this man not do? Including Mandarin Chinese and Serbian. And believe it or not, he used to run a business giving tours of North Korea. Got to know a little bit more about that. He's been kidnapped twice on 2 different continents. And he'll tell you the only reason he's still alive is because of his ability to sell his way into and out of just about any type of situation. He's created a playbook on sales, influence, persuasion, negotiation, and he's been tapped to speak and present some of the biggest companies in the world, such as Google, Apple, Twitter, and Square. And he's given talks on security, social engineering, and psychology places such as Black Hat, DEF CON, and Harvard Business School. So please, welcome to the show, the one and only Jordan Harbinger. Jordan.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man.
The last name is so important. You got to pronounce the last name right. You know, like I said, my mom says, if you pronounce a name wrong, just tell them you're from Arkansas. That's what happens down there. So, hey, I mean, there's a lot here that we're going to cover today. I've got to know about the North Korean tours and how that even is possible. But I love having people like you on who understand human psychology, who understand how to use human behavior and how that applies to being a top salesperson when you understand what that actually even does psychologically to your people you're talking to. So I'm pumped to have you on here. So let's do this. I want to dive right into your story, give our listeners a feel for your background and really how you arrived at this point where you're one of the elite authorities on sales, influence, persuasion, networking. Give us a little bit more of your background and how this started for you. How did you just learn all these skills?
Well, I started when I was a law student. I basically knew that I was going to I was going into the wrong profession. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get fired at some point because they're going to be like, this guy doesn't belong here. And in high school, whatever, I was able to just kind of show up to the geometry test, and I was like, oh, I'm such a clever kid. I'll figure this out and I'll get a B plus and my life will be a breeze. And then as I got to college, I was like, well, I have to outwork everyone because everyone here is smart. And so I did that. I had to sort of ramp up my Midwest work ethic and study for 10 hours a day while everybody else was out drinking and partying.
Sure.
And then when I got to Wall Street, as my first job, which you have during one of the summers in law school, it was like, oh man, I'm screwed. Everyone's smart. Everyone works hard. My competitive advantage is gone. I'm in trouble. So I learned that networking was the way that a lot of the younger, highest paid partners were the youngest, highest paid partners. And they had pure job security because everybody else was like, oh, I better bill 2,500 hours this year so I can keep up my equity partnership. And this guy, Dave, especially who I have in mind, who hired me, he was like, guess I better go do jujitsu for the third day in the row and hang out with these investment bankers from Deutsche Bank because that's where we get our clients. And then he was never in the office. Like, this is a guy from Brooklyn who had a tan. And I was like, what are you doing all day? And he's like, he's limping in the office. He's like, sorry, I twisted my knee doing jujitsu yesterday. Oh, sorry. Yeah, my back's a little sore. I've just got a sunburn from golf. I'm going on a charity cruise next week, so I can't make it into the office. I won't have internet. Stuff like that. We were always getting those emails. So I was like, who is this guy? Like, why is this guy never in the office? Why is this guy never doing anything? And finally, I caught up with him because he was supposed to be my mentor, which on Wall Street at that time was HR had some forum that was like, did you mentor someone? And he was like, ugh, fine.
I'll
so
put this
everybody
kid there.
There's this kid. So everybody else was they had their mentors, and the mentors were like working in bankruptcy law or something. And they're like, let's go to McCormick and Schmick for lunch. And then let's go see Blue Man Group tonight because they had these crazy expense accounts. And this was like the only time these guys could get out of the office and to do something that the company would expense. They were like, let's do it. So I remember going out with other people's mentors sometimes because HR was like, this kid Jordan's not getting any mentorship. We'd go out with other people and they'd be like, have a beer, get a seafood tower as an appetizer. And I was like, what is happening? This is what you're doing every day. And for me, my mentor was like, Dave was like, never there. Right. So HR finally made him take me to Starbucks or something in like the basement office of the building that we were in.
Sure.
And he's like, so what questions do you have? And I was like, questions, how come you're never in the office, but you're a partner? How does that work? Do you just work from home? And I also figured that if I worked from home, that it would take them longer to figure out I didn't belong there and and then fire me. Sure. And they were like, yeah, well, I'm working from home, but I'm also generating a lot of business for the firm. And I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. I need to figure this out. I need to figure out how he's doing it. Like, what's the cheat code for working from home? And that's when he told me, no, I'm really, most of the time I'm generating business for the firm. Sure. And of course, my next question was, great, how do you do that? And his answer was like, just be cool, man. And I thought, because every lawyer has just thought like, oh, I'm going to be cool. Right. Why do you think we went cool? Why do you think we went to law school? Because we're not cool, right? Like, if we were cool, we probably wouldn't have gone to law school in the first place, let alone worked here. So that was unactionable, non-actionable advice. That was like, just be taller or be yourself or be confident. Nobody knows how to do that. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't help anybody with anything. So I realized at that point, I've got to figure this out myself. I've got to like model someone, look at someone else doing it, figure it out. And I started to take networking courses, but those were all, and not there's anything wrong with Dale Carnegie, but it was kind of like some guy in a sweater vest that's like struggling to pay his rent is not going to be able to teach me how to close multi-million-dollar law deals with Goldman Sachs. It's just, we're at the Learning Annex /YMCA on a Tuesday night, and this guy's like trying to figure out how he's going to literally like how he's going to pay a cell phone bill, and I'm just like, this is not the business. Not going to help me. So I took what I could from those courses because those guys do know some stuff, like how to remember people's names and use the memory palace to remember that someone's kids play tennis. But I kind of thought like, okay, if I don't get this $1 million law deal from my Deutsche Bank friend, it's not because like I didn't look him in the eye and have a firm handshake 3 years ago. It's because I'm doing something else wrong or not doing something that other people are doing. So I decided to focus on that. And that's when I realized like, okay, this isn't going to be a simple memory palace trick, handshake trick, showing up at all the right times, you know, type of thing. This isn't send a handwritten note. Not that, again, not there's anything wrong with that, but it's like a tactic that is 1% of the equation and not the whole pie.
For 100 years.
If I get a handwritten note from someone, I'm like, oh, that was pretty nice, but I'm not like, man, that's the guy that sent me that handwritten note.
I'm going to buy from him now.
Right. No, this guy, I'm never buying a car from anyone else. Right. It's just not a thing. It's like one engagement out of 100 that you need to do that year to like get my attention and build rapport.
Sure.
So I decided to break it down into little component pieces.
Yeah.
And those component pieces were like nonverbal communication, persuasion, influence, proximity. I mean, I'm not, these aren't like categories, but these are different things that I had to realize worked well for people. Like why do you like your favorite bartender? Oh, he's kind. He hooks you up. You see him all the time. Yeah. He's got a good sense of humor. He's interested in your life. Like I tried to sort of disassemble each of these component parts. Yeah. And that was what I initially used to teach a course during law school that no one cared about. That was about networking. That later evolved into like a dating and body language course. Yeah. That later evolved into my first company. And now I do the Jordan Harbinger show. And I'm just like, you know, this is the Jordan Harbinger show is like the culmination of great interviews, or at least good interviews, I'd like to think, and using a lot of the same rapport and networking techniques that I used when I was teaching dating stuff in my early 30s, late 20s, applied to business and applied to getting great guests on the show. And that's, people go, how did you get Kobe Bryant? Because they know somebody who paid Kobe like 50 grand to do an interview for their show. And I'm like, they pitched me because I had really good connections. And that's what it's all about. It's about growing and nurturing a network. And when I was selling training and courses, which I don't do anymore, I sold millions of dollars worth of stuff. And I remember companies trying to replace me, which is always funny. And the companies being like, oh yeah, Jordan just like calls this list of people and then they buy, certain percentage buy. So we're going to cut his commission down to jack squat. And we're going to give this other guy like a lower commission too. And I remember being like, not selling anything and going, call me in, 2 weeks if you want. 30 days, I'm going to be gone for that long. I'm going to take a vacation. 30 days when you're feeling it, and 45 to 60 days when you realize you're going to go out of business because this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And they were like, I remember getting laughed out of the room at one point, and every salesperson knows and loves this. Laughed out of the room, and I go, I'm just thinking they'll be back, right? Because they don't understand what I'm doing on the phone. They don't understand what I'm doing to get the people.
They don't know the whole sales process.
On the phone. Yeah, they don't understand. So then it was like 2 weeks in, the guy hadn't closed anything. 3 weeks in, the guy hadn't closed anything. 4 weeks in, he makes like one sale, but it's like $500 instead of $5,000.
Right.
And then after a month, they're like, how soon can you get back here? And I was like,
how soon can you come back and we're going to pay you more?
Yeah. The question, and I remember saying, it's not a question of how soon I can get back. It's what my raise is going to be, because I've been a little dissatisfied with my previous commission. And I realize now that I have some instability in this job. So I need to make up, and I need to make up for the month I was gone. And they were like, we're going to give you a $10,000 bonus to get back here. And you're going to get a 5% bump in commission. And I just remember thinking, this is the most powerful, not like, oh, I'm so cocky and arrogant. This was like, I realized at that time, I was actually humbled by the fact this was like the most powerful skill set that I'd ever learned. And I learned it entirely by accident. I didn't go into it thinking I'm going to be a great sales guy. I went into it thinking, I just don't want to get fired. I better have a good network. I didn't even realize I was learning sales.
100%. Your sales and communication skills are the number one most important thing you can learn. And if you learn that, if you learn the right skills that work with human behavior rather than work against it, you can sell anything and be at the top financially. It doesn't really matter, like very quickly. Now, I wanted to talk to you about this. So I was on YouTube watching you over the weekend, Labor Day weekend.
Laboring on Labor Day weekend.
I know. I want to talk to you a little bit more about this phone hacker stuff you talk about. You talk about when you're around 13, that your curiosity led you to become a phone hacker. Give us a little bit more about that and how the things you discovered about yourself in those formative years helped shape you as like a successful business person. I'd love to know that.
Yeah, the phone hacking thing, I always struggle to find kind of a nexus between that and like sales and entrepreneurship. But I think part of it is I found this is sort of pre-internet, right? Like the internet existed, but it wasn't the consumer internet that we have now. The World Wide Web was like, I'm not even sure I think it technically existed, but you couldn't use your mouse to click on things. Like that's what we're talking about. We're talking about you hit the tab button and things get highlighted and you hit enter. And that was like, wow, the cursor moves when you hit tab and you can click on these links tap on these links by using your keyboard. Like, this is really cool. And I remember Netscape 1.0 or whatever it was came out. Most people probably don't even know what that is. Well, maybe people here who are advanced in their careers do. And it was like, you could go to Yahoo and there was the colored Yahoo banner and you could use your mouse to move around and click on the various links for things. And that was just mind blowing. That was insanity. So looking at things like that was next level. And I remember before that, the real network that it existed was the telephone network. Yeah. You know, it used computers, but it also used different sounds to communicate with different equipment because all you had were these analog phone lines. Yeah. And that to me was really interesting because it was kind of a window out of my boring only child world of like watching reruns of Perfect Strangers on TV. And so I decided to get into that, and I was talking with people from all over the world and using the sounds that the system made to mimic other things in the system and make free phone calls. And it was a trip. I was 13, 14 years old. And what I didn't realize at the time was that I was solving problems in a system and breaking a system or rearranging a system to suit my needs. And that's kind of what entrepreneurship is, not to get all too high level with it, but a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, they're not the people who went, yeah, I've got to do like this process and become a doctor. And then I join a hospital and I do a residency and then I jump into my own practice, profit. These were people that went, there's got to be a different way to do this, and I just don't really know what it is. So I'm going to screw around and break stuff until I figure it out. And that's like what sales was for me too. It was, like I said, I didn't even realize I was learning sales. Like my first sale, I think, was we had sales guys in the company, and I was talking to people on ICQ and Facebook Messenger or whatever it was. It wasn't even called Facebook Messenger at the time, just whatever sort of messenger platforms there were on MySpace or something. And I was like, oh, this person's interested in our products and services, and this person's interested in our products and services. And I would hand those leads to the sales guy, and he would close them. And he's like, dude, keep them coming. Like, these are really good hot leads that you're talking to online. And that was when I realized, okay, this is like a real good source of revenue. And then our sales guy, he decided to quit without any warning. And the boss and other people in the company were like, can you do it? And I was like, no. And they're like, we'll train you. And I said, I can't do this. I've never done it before. I can't sell something. Like, I don't even know how you do that. And they got me this sales trainer that was like, you pick up the phone, you have a conversation, and you call them. And I was like, there's got to be a better system than this, because it was like the worst training ever. So all I did was call and chat with people for a while. And at the end of the conversation, I was like, have you ever thought about coming through one of our programs? And they were like, yeah, sure. A lot of the time. And I was like, well, it's kind of expensive, but it's definitely worth it. But they were like, well, I talked to him for an hour already, you know? Sure. And they were like, yeah, sure. Let's try it. Yeah. Why not? You know, you seem like a good guy. And it was like, all right. So I just kept doing that. I'd generate leads online, and then I'd call them on the phone after getting their phone number, and I would ask for their credit card. And I had what I didn't realize at the time was I had a really good close rate, right? It was like really good.
Yeah. You said something that really is important there in the very beginning. You talked about everything, you know, entrepreneurs create products and services based on problems they find, right? Mm-hmm. So they basically find problems that maybe people didn't even know about or maybe even thought about, right? And they build their product or service around solving those problems or challenges. Right. Like every product or service that's ever been created was there to solve a problem. Otherwise, it wouldn't be created, right? Like everything we have out there, even the car, was to solve a problem. It's faster to drive than walk or on your horse, right? It was solving a problem. So you talked about becoming what we call like a problem finder and problem solver, not a product pusher, right? So in our day, like you talked about some of the courses you went through on networking with Dale Carnegie, and you know those are great. Those were written in the 20s and 30s. You know, today's consumer is completely different, right? So now when you're talking to your prospects, you have to become even better at problem finding, right? And that means finding problems, like asking the right questions at the right time in that conversation to help your prospect find problems in their own mind that they didn't even know they had, right? Or maybe they knew about the problem, but they didn't know how bad it was. Or maybe they knew they had a problem, but they didn't realize the consequences if they don't solve it. So without asking the right questions in that conversation, you can't help your prospects find problems, right? And so they don't buy from you. So you can't really solve their problem. So you hit it right on the head. You're more of a problem finder and solver, not a product pusher. It's a big difference in our day and age.
It was a huge difference. And also I realized a lot of people misidentified the problem. So I would chat with people and they'd go, yeah, this isn't working out for me. That's not working out for me. But I think the problem is, or I'd say, what do you think the problem is? I think. And they would go, oh, the problem is I don't make enough money to get the lifestyle, get the job that I want, or I don't make enough money to like get the people in my life around me. If I had this or that, or if I moved more of this, or if I lived in a bigger city, I'd have this problem solved. Yeah. And I'd be like, what if it was this and this and this? And they'd be like, yeah, maybe. And then I would proceed to explain their actual problem to them better than they could explain it themselves. Right. So I was able to articulate their issues better than they were able to articulate their issues. And that really was like the clincher, because as soon as I did that, I'd identify a problem that they sort of suspected was the problem, but weren't sure. And they had 7 other red herrings. I'd explain why those weren't the problem and why the one thing was, but also here's 3 other things you didn't think about. And then they instantly were like, oh, okay, I think you're right. And then if they were like, well, there's other programs out there that are cheaper, I'd be like, here's what you should do. You should call them, get an appointment as soon as possible, because you don't really want to delay on solving this. Ask them this, and this. Just all these questions where I knew that the other places would have like crappy answers for. Yeah. Like, yes, it's cheaper, and make sure that they have a really good guarantee, because the problem is a lot of people, they go through these self-help programs and then they leave and they feel great about it, but like a week later, they still have the same issues. Ask about follow-up support. Ask about the warranty on this thing. Ask about the, and then they would be like, okay. And then of course they'd try and reach the other company. It would take like a month to get an appointment with the one sales guy. They'd be talking to some dumb intern SDR rep who like didn't understand anything about the product. Then they'd finally get their appointment, already annoyed that they had to wait. They'd ask questions and the person would be like, let me get back to you on that. Oh, let me get back to you on that. Oh, our warranty's 5 days, but we've never had any problems, like stuff like that. And they'd come back to me like, they'd run back to me like the day they had their appointment, and they'd be like, I'm ready to put my credit card down now. Yeah. And I was just
instantly built trust by challenging them on the problems that they thought they had, right? Because they view you more as the trusted authority, whereas they viewed these other people you sent them to as just another salesperson trying to sell them something.
Right.
It's a complete difference in your income and your sales success, 100%. Now, I wanted to dive into this. You talk about the secret third path. What do you mean by the secret third path?
Yeah, that's some good old hyperbole about how everybody else, when I was like I'd mentioned before, when I was in high school, it was like, oh, just show up to the test, you'll be fine. And then when I was in law school, it was like outwork everyone. And then Wall Street, it was like outworking people doesn't work. Everyone's working 7 days a week. Being smarter than everyone, good luck with that. It's also a really slow process to make yourself smarter, and everyone else there is also trying to get more educated on the subjects that we're doing. So I was like, I'm screwed, like I'm going to get canned. But the secret third path was what Dave was talking about, which is generating business for the firm, because they don't really care if you're like this gifted innovator in the financial derivative space, if you're bringing in a client every quarter, right, that drops $1 million on a deal. Yeah. They don't care about that. And the other thing was, that might be great among, like, if you're a salesman and you're working with other salesmen, everybody's like competitive and really going for it. They might not undercut you because they realize that's not good for company culture and that's not good for sales generally. But they might be like, if I'm trying to outsell you and outsell 3 other people and we're all pretty good at sales, like we're going to come in pretty tight unless you have some other advantage that doesn't make any sense. That's not in the context we're dealing with now. But if I'm trying to outsell people that don't even know that they're selling, I have a huge advantage. So all the other lawyers were like, yeah, you work hard, and then as you become a 7th-year associate, I don't know, you start to like network or something, and then ... you bring in some deals and they make you a partner. And I was like, no, you work and you create a network as a first-year associate with all the other junior-level investment bankers. You find the people who are in it for the long haul and not going to retire or like quit because they hate it. You hang out with those people and you go for runs and you go to the gym together and you do all these little things. And then in 8 years, when I'm trying to become a partner and they're still working for Goldman Sachs or Deutsche Bank, I go, hey, if you throw me a deal, I'll make partner and I'll make sure I do a kick-ass job on your deal and I'll be the best law firm you've ever had. And they'll go, dude, we've been going to the gym together for 7 years. Of course I'm going to give you the business when I get the choice. And then all these other lawyers that I'm working with are like, hi, Tom, I see you are a managing director at Deutsche Bank. Please think of me when you have law derivative financial product needs. And he's like, delete, right? And it doesn't even get past stage one. And then everybody else who's an 8th year associate is tearing their hair out. I'm never going to make partner because I can't generate business. How do I do that? And then they go to like a learning class, like the ones I was going to 8 years ago, where they're trying to learn how to bring in deals for the firm, or they're going to like a luncheon with stale pizza or old pizza. And they're like, and it's like how to generate business for your law firm, sponsored by McKinsey, right? Or some crap. Meanwhile, I'm like, you guys are so late. Like I started this in 2004. It's 2010 and you're trying to learn how to network. Like see you guys in 5 years. You're done.
You're done. Now, let's talk about some of these specific skills that you mentioned. Okay. So you talked about body language, your nonverbal body language, right? You talked about persuasion, influence, networking. How can sales pros listening to you today, how can they master those just like you've mastered them?
Yeah, this is a lot of practice. A lot of people, they don't realize that going and creating relationships is literally the process of making friends. Like a lot of salespeople that are on the lower end of skill, they're like, I'm going to call as many people as I can. And then I go like, oh, how's the weather out there in California today? Oh yeah, Reddit's pretty warm. Anyway, have you heard of Google ads? Right? Yeah. Like it doesn't work. So it's about developing relationships, and I don't have like necessarily quick body language tips. I have 1 or 2 drills that I can teach, but a lot of it is practice and becoming much more at ease with talking to other people. And introverts are like, no, I'm screwed. It's not true. I feel like a lot of introverts are actually some really good salespeople. They might not be great at selling from the stage or whatever, at least not right away.
Sure.
But introverts are typically better at, and the new science shows this, they're better at listening, or I should say we're better, because technically I'm an introvert too, even though I'm a broadcaster and a speaker. We listen when people talk. We take their emotions into consideration when we have conversations. Those are huge advantages when we're creating a relationship. 100%. So it's a matter of learning to read the other person instead of being so obsessed with whatever pitch you're putting out there. A lot of people will get their talking points from their sales, director or something like that. And they're like, I've got to get through these. And I'm like, I want to spend the first 20 minutes of our 45 or hour long conversation listening to what you think the problems are.
It's more about the quality of the conversation than the quantity of conversation.
Totally. Yeah. People will try and call 50 people a day and they're like, I'm dialing for dollars. And I'm like, I'm calling 5 people per day, but 4 of them are closing and it's $8,000. So go ahead, call 50 people and 14 of them will maybe remember you. Maybe you'll get 1. I'll call 5. And then, or I'll have 8 calls with somebody and they're like, you are wasting your time. That person is never going to buy. And I'm like, well, what makes you say that? Yeah. Because they're not saying they don't need this. They love talking about this. They just don't have the money yet. You don't think that this is a person who sees a need. So eventually that person would like get a bonus from work and be like, I'm ready to buy. Here's $7,000. And the people who were selling next to me were like, what the hell? Why is that happening?
Come from 3 months ago.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, I've been talking to this guy for 6 months, every other month it's 3 phone calls, 4 phone calls.
Yeah.
They didn't have the money, but I was listening to them on their development and going, here's the thing you can try. And they'd go, that worked. So who do you think they're going to buy from? The person that's been sort of informally coaching them for 3 months on how to, of course. It's all about the trust. And these guys are trying to do like 7-minute calls and feel out if the person's qualified. Like, do they have a job? No. Okay. Then hang up the phone.
Yeah.
100%. As soon as that person gets money, they're never going to talk to you again. So it was just a matter of teaching people. When I started teaching networking to the lawyers, it was like, you have to develop trust. You have to develop a relationship. You don't do that by asking them for business. You do that by like going jogging, right?
100%.
Or calling them and asking them what they're going to need in 2 years, where they see the industry going. Then they're like, this guy's smart, not being like, so can you tell your boss to hire Thatcher Profit and Wood for all his legal derivative financial product needs? Yeah, 100%. I'll get right on that, buddy.
All right. So I want to talk to you about this kidnapping you talked about. So you've been kidnapped twice, but you said you've been able to use your skills to get out of that situation. How is that even possible?
So the first time was just pure brute strength. That wasn't really a skilled situation. That was more like a choke out the driver situation. And that was in Mexico. That was 20 years ago, literally now. But the second time was I was in former Yugoslavia, and the state security cops, who are like these undercover pieces of crap that don't really do anything, but terrorize the local population. They decided that I was a spy because I was not registered as a foreign agent, essentially, in the country, and I'd lived there for too long, and blah, 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 blah. So they took me in, and they were super angry, super emotional, and I was like, oh, I actually have kind of an advantage here if they're going to be out of control. And I noticed that they were drinking. And I was like, oh, good. They're probably, this isn't great. You know, I got drunk kidnappers who could be violent, but I also have guys that like can't control their emotions. So they were really aggressive, really angry. You know, your country bombed us. We're going to beat your ass, like all this stuff. And I would just be super calm. And I think, you know, in sales, you'd call this like controlling the frame. You know, you get like an irate customer, and I was just like,
collective confidence.
Collective confidence. Is that what you call it?
Love it. Collective confidence.
So this was more like, you know, we're going to beat you up. You want to get your ass kicked, you know? And I would be like, no, I don't want to get my ass kicked. And also, you know, I realize that you're super upset about that. I didn't even know about that. I think I was 14 when that happened, you know, and they'd be like, which wasn't true. I was probably like 19, but whatever, you know, you want them to visualize you being like a kid. And I remember learning about that in middle school, you know, and they're like, I was in college, but
tell us more about what happened.
Yeah. And I was like, can you tell me? And he's like, yeah. And then this happened, and then this happened. And I was like, oh my God, that's terrible. I can't believe it. Yeah. I can't believe it. I wasn't even old enough to vote when that happened. So I don't really understand it. Can you educate me? You know, and I kept asking him questions, and then I would be like, so anyway, just sort of nonchalantly, because you don't want them to focus on the problem either, I'd be like, where's a good place to eat? Because after this, I think I'm going to like be super hungry because I didn't really eat last night. And like Serbian food is so good. You know, where can I go get like the best food? And then him and the other guys started talking about restaurants, and he's telling me about restaurants. Meanwhile, like the other guy is really upset, and he's in another room with another guy that was taken with me, and they were like fighting physically. You know, he was like beating my buddy's ass because my buddy didn't know what he was doing.
Right.
And I'm sitting there talking about food, and then he's like, you know, and you come here and you live here, you're probably like screwing a lot of the women. And I'm like, oh God, this guy like really got kind of dark pretty fast. And I'd be like, no, you know, I find women so confusing. And I just went off on this tirade about how I'm just like this pathetic, you know, young person who like doesn't understand the country that he lives in. And like, I'm just getting walked all over by all the people, but the people here are super nice. Like, you guys are friendly. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, we arrested you. We're not friendly. We're not your friend. And I'd be like, yeah, but I mean, you guys are like really hospitable. Like, that's what I love about Serbia is like the food's good and the people are super nice. And he just couldn't stay angry because I was controlling the whole conversation. And he didn't really understand that because he'd been drinking, and also he was an absolute idiot. You know, he wasn't a well-trained.
Your buddy was like push, push, push. So they were pushing back. You've learned skills to get them to pull you in. You've learned skills how to use human behavior to your advantage.
Exactly. So I made him do all the work. I exhausted all of his anger by just not reflecting it, just being and just almost acting like I didn't even notice that he was angry. And I mean, this guy was like kicking my chair and like yelling in my face. And I'd be like, you know, I've got a couple options here. I can like get really scared. I can yell back. I can like, you know, cry. Like, what am I going to do? And I just pretended like he was totally being normal. And that doesn't work on everybody, but it certainly works on like really poorly trained garbage people. This was just a trashy garbage person. A lot of the state security officers back in Serbia at that time were just militiamen from Bosnia that had gotten evicted from their homes by Croats or Bosniaks or whatever in the Civil War. And then they were given police jobs in the country of Serbia that allowed them to kind of just like roam free and be
terrorize
stupid.
People.
Terrorize people. I mean, this is a guy who probably had like a, you know, strawberry farm or something in the middle of nowhere in the countryside. And now he's like in a big city with a authority and is drinking on Tuesday morning. Like, he's a pathetic individual. And I just try to keep that in mind. Now, yes, they have power over you, but I realized also like, this isn't somebody who's like smart. I can outsmart this person. So
you help diffuse that power.
Yeah. And so it really was a lot of like pulling things out. And there at the end, he was like, okay, well, we're just going to wait for your friend. your friend's getting his ass beat, ha ha ha. And I was like, whatever, I'm not going to react to that. And I was like, I'm so thirsty, I'm going to throw up, I'm so thirsty. And there's no water where we were in the basement of a building,
Sure.
like a rundown building. And he's like yelling for water, and the bartender is not there. There was a bartender guy upstairs who was like, don't worry, you're going to be fine. And he's like, these guys are idiots. I remember he told me in English, these guys are idiots. You'll be fine. And I thought that was weird because like, who's this bartender guy? And it turned out he was also a state security agent. He just didn't want anything to do with what was happening. He was just kind of like clearly we were dealing with like the dumbest people that he'd ever worked with. Like he was really not having it.
Sure.
And so he wasn't around. This guy ends up leaving to go get water and bringing his friend with him, thinking that my friend and I were restrained, which I had long since worked the restraints off. And I'd long since been chatting with him. And so he just thought, he's like, you stay here or you're in trouble. And I was like, of course, I need the water. Where am I going to get the water? As soon as they left, we left. And it was probably about 6-8 hours long. I mean, it was not a fun sort of situation that we were in, but
Sure.
it was, I was very much like, staying calm was the way to get out of this situation. Staying calm and focusing on getting these guys, almost 20/20 hindsight, like through almost like a sales funnel of build trust, and then after that, create an opportunity to escape. Anything you do where you're like, you're never going to break me. That's just a bunch of garbage you see in movies.
Yes, you push, they push back harder. 100%.
Right. And they have all the power. I mean, they have all the power. Like they have pistols and I'm tied to a chair. Like, what am I going to do? I'm in their country.
Over in Serbia. That is amazing. So let's talk about this doorway principle you talk a lot about in some of your podcasts. It's basically the notion that skills and techniques can be practiced. And once you practice, they become natural, almost like a Hollywood actor, right? Tell us a little bit more about the doorway principle and how does it correlate to, let's say, first impressions for like a salesperson or a business owner?
Yeah. So the doorway drill is essentially, this is a body language drill. This is really useful for sales professionals, especially. So we know that people judge us based on our nonverbal communication. And if you don't believe me, go to a outdoor mall, maybe now. And you'll see that when people walk by, even if you think I'm not a judgy person, you're actually judging everybody that walks by you. You think like attractive, fit, fat, tall, skinny, scary, whatever. We always make these sort of judgments. If you don't believe me, walk down the road and tell me what happens. Just pay attention to your inner dialogue. Or monologue, I should say. Well, maybe if you've got multiple personalities, you have an inner dialogue. Most of us have an inner monologue. And you'll realize that you're making judgments of other people. They're, of course, making judgments of us. So what this means is if we walk into a room and we're open, upright, friendly, positive, confident, whatever sort of traits we want to portray to others, that's how they're going to initially judge us. We want them to think, oh, this is a friendly, open person with a warm personality. That's the sort of initial trust builder for most people, like these cues. And so the issue is a lot of people think that they're being judged on their nonverbal or verbal communication. And so they'll pay attention to like a verbal proximity. So they'll think like, okay, I walk up and I start a conversation and then that's when the judgment begins. They're like evaluating me based on that. And that's not true. People judge you based on when they first see you, as we previously explained. So you've got to be really cognizant of the fact that as soon as you walk in the door, people are looking at you and paying attention. And that means that when you walk in the door, that's your first impression, not when you like go up to them and start talking or order a drink or whatever it is.
Right.
So when we walk in the door, we want to be open, upright, positive, confident, whatever, smile on your face, standing up straight, whatever sort of qualities you want to embody. The best way to do that is to do that the second you walk through the doorway, and you use the doorway as a cue to straighten up, chest up, shoulders back, smile on your face, whatever it is. You want to use the doorway as a cue. The problem is we're going through doorways all day, every day. And so the cue gets lost, right? Well, you go, that's a great idea. And then you walk out your office door and you walk into the bathroom through another door and you've forgotten to do it already.
Yeah.
So we need something that's going to break the pattern, interrupt the pattern. And you would call this, there's some sort of like hypnosis things that I think it's called a pattern interrupt or something like that in neuro-linguistic programming. But just take something that's out of the ordinary that's going to cause you to think. And what that is for me is these like brightly colored Post-it notes, the little ones that aren't really good for anything else. Stick them up in the doorway at eye level. You don't even have to write anything on it. Yeah. It's just so that you go, what's that Post-it note doing there? Oh, right. Upright, positive, confident body language. Put one up in your office, put one up on the bathroom door, put one up in your bedroom, wherever you're, working from home these days.
Yeah.
And you'll start to realize, oh, okay, you'll start to break that, and you'll start to use the doorway as a cue. And then when you leave your house, you'll be able to do this as well, right? You'll be walking outside.
It becomes a habit. You see it, you're like, oh, and by 3, 4, or 5 days of doing that, it just becomes natural to you.
At least a week or two, and switch up the colors, switch the side of the Post-it note so that you don't just stop looking at it, because your brain is quick to adapt.
Okay.
And that way, whenever you walk into rooms, you're going to be giving off the right nonverbal first impression, and you don't have to manually remember to like straighten up and be cool. That's not really going to work for most people. It's not
You talk a lot about practicing something deliberately.
Yes.
Explain that a little bit more, like put some context around that, kind of what you mean by practicing it deliberately.
Deliberate practice is a concept that was invented by Dr. Anders Ericsson. It sort of breaks this 10,000 hour rule, which has been proven to be kind of baloney, that a lot of people know about. Like 10,000 hours to mastery is just not true. Deliberate practice is, to give you an idea, let's put this in a context. So a lot of people will say, oh, if you just play the guitar a lot, you're going to get good at the guitar. It's probably more or less true. But really great guitar players, they practice things that are really tough for them, and they do that a lot. They don't just play Mary Had a Little Lamb 10,000 times or play songs that they enjoy 10,000 times. They go, man, it's really hard for me to jump my fingers around on these frets and go from here to here really fast without making extra sounds or without blowing it. Yeah. So you find really great guitar players, they're just doing that. They'll practice that for like a month.
They're working on their weaknesses
They're working on their weaknesses. Yeah. And they're working on really advanced techniques that would set them a cut above. Yeah. So in something like in any sport, it's like, okay, well, what's the differentiating factor? Okay, it's somebody who's going to be like really agile and really fast. So you better be practicing sprints. Don't just bench press every day. And that sounds really obvious, but in our career, a lot of us will just be like, oh, I'm really good at sales because I make a lot of phone calls every day, so I'm really good at this. No, you're really good at dialing. You're really good at maybe like the first 5 seconds of a phone call or the first 5 minutes of a phone call. If you want to get really, really good at sales, get really good at talking to somebody about stuff that seems totally unrelated and using it to build trust. Get really good at redirecting the conversation when somebody starts talking about their new wallpaper. Make that relevant.
If you're getting that prospect that always, if you're in a lot of objections, like, let us think it over, or we need more time on this, like, what are you practicing to cause that? What are you doing in that conversation? Number one, you have to figure out, what am I saying or not asking in that conversation that's triggering that person to say that, right? And then once I've learned that, how do I fix that where I don't get that objection? How do I prevent that objection from even happening? And it's about becoming the best, right? So
yeah, and it's about upstream thinking.
Yeah, 100%. Like if you're a basketball player and you're really good with right-handed layups, but you don't do well with left-handed layups, you just practice it till you make the weakness into a strength. I mean, it's not rocket science. I love that. Now, let's talk about these 3 interesting rule stuff that you talk about. Okay. You talked about 3 interesting rules that you followed that has really helped you. Rule number 1 is dig the well before you're thirsty. Tell us what that means.
Sure. Dig the well before you're thirsty is all about making relationships before you need them. So a lot of folks, I teach a lot of networking skills to special forces, law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and they're always like, oh, these are really good. This is great. I need to learn these techniques. I need to get better at this. And people are always like, wait, how come MI6 needs networking techniques, right? And it's like, well, their lives depend on it. So even if they know like 80% of what I'm teaching, and they need the systems for the other 20%, great. I mean, what would you pay for a 20% edge or a 5% edge, right? So I always find it funny because I'll talk to like, I don't want to throw any particular profession under the bus, but I'll talk to like, let's say I'm talking to an amateur salesman who's new to the profession.
Sure.
I guess they're professional if they're in the profession, but they're new. And they'll say something like, oh yeah, I'm in sales. So I didn't look at your free networking course because I don't really need it. I'm in sales. And I go, that's interesting, because when I talk to people who might die if they do this wrong, they devour this. But when I talk to somebody who's making 40 grand a year doing SDR, sales development stuff for their company, and isn't getting promoted, you are too good to learn this stuff. You're already in sales. You've got all the resources at your disposal. And I find it to be kind of a loser mindset. And it's very interesting to me when I track some of these people. I used to do it more because I wanted to see what was going on. And it actually got kind of depressing because I would sort of put a pin in their email and boomerang it for 6 months, and I would check in. And inevitably, I found that the people who kind of poo-pooed the idea that they needed to dig the well before they got thirsty and create relationships, I would either before 6 months or shortly thereafter, when I checked in, they would say something like, well, I've switched companies. I just couldn't, it wasn't really for me.
It wasn't the good product.
I wasn't getting promoted. The product left something to be desired. And I was like, or did you just not dig the well before you got thirsty? You couldn't close, you couldn't get it done. And a lot of people would be like, yeah, I quit because somebody I hired 4 years ago got promoted over me. And I'd go, that's interesting, huh? There's a reason for that. Mm-hmm. And it's not because you're a dislikable guy. It's because you didn't do squat. You thought you'd keep your head down and that your work would speak for itself. And this other person knew that their work would speak well of them, but they also knew that they needed relationships. So they built all the relationships that you should have been doing.
Was like, Jordan, I'm making $40,000 a year as a salesperson. How do I learn the skills from you to make $40,000 a month?
Yeah, of course. And these guys were not interested in that. And I noticed that there's a massive difference between somebody who does this and somebody who doesn't. I get sad ones too, where it's like, hey, I don't do your networking course because I'm a preschool teacher. I don't need this, but hey, cool, love the show. And I'm like, fair enough, but you should really be doing this anyway. And then like 1-2 years later, I'll get an email that's like, because I do advice every Fridays on Feedback Friday on the Jordan Harbinger show. I'll get something like, I haven't been networking and I just got laid off. What do I do? And I go, okay, 3 years ago when I told you should be doing this, start building a network. Then when this crap happens, reach out to them and they'll be more than happy to help you. Oh, you didn't do any of that? Okay, start from where you would have been 3 years ago with 5 minutes a day of checking in with your network. And hopefully in a few months, you'll get somebody that maybe gives you a shot, but you're in this unemployment thing for the long haul right now.
Yeah. And I see it so much from professionals, especially salespeople who make low six figures have such high egos. Yes. And they never learn more advanced skills to go from, let's say, 150 grand a year to 300 grand a year or $500,000 a year. And the people who do are the people that will always get promoted over you. They'll always have everything they ever want. Even if they switch to a profession, they're going to get major signing bonuses. They're going to do whatever they want because they've learned the right skills. Let's talk about rule number 2. You talk about give without the expectation or attachment of getting anything in return. Tell us more about that.
So this is ABG. You know, ABC always be closing, right? This
I hate that.
I know. This is ABG, always be giving or always be generous. And it's interesting because I see a lot of these, like, I won't say their name, but there's like popular but terrible sales gurus out there that are like, yeah, just call them 800 times until they buy from you. And I'm like,
muscle.
And I'm like, that doesn't work. That's just something you heard from your like Scientology guru and it's garbage. You know, like just stop.
It's so old school.
Yeah, it's old school, and it turns you into a kind of like an a-hole that nobody actually wants to do business with.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. You know, people go like, oh, eventually this car dealer is going to buy our software from us because I keep harassing him. It's like, no, you're going to get a lawsuit. You're going to get bad reviews and they're going to want you to go away. The last thing they're going to do is reward your behavior. So
anytime you know, there's these, I have to say, this is, so I love this conversation. So anytime a sales trainer tells you that the more objections you get from your prospect, the more interested they are in, you need to run the other way because that goes against everything in human psychology ever. Think about every sale that you've ever made where there was no objections. They just went through the whole process, enrolled, paid, and it was the easiest thing since sliced bread. That's an easy sale. The more objections you get, the less likely they are to actually buy. That is the biggest myth I've ever heard. You have to learn objection prevention skills. You have to learn how to prevent objections from even happening in their mind. Keep going. I love this.
Yeah. So ABG, giving without the expectation of anything in return. An example of this would be, let's say that I go to an event and I meet somebody and they're a web designer. I don't need a web designer, but I'm not, instead of looking over their shoulder at the next person, I just keep that in my internal Rolodex or my actual CRM, which is what I really do now. I keep them in my CRM, web designer. And then let's say I meet you and you're like, oh God, I need a new website, and I hired this designer, he flaked. I hired another designer, they got sick. I hired another designer, she had a baby, and now she's like AWOL on the project. I just have terrible luck. And I'll go, I know some people that are pretty reliable with this. They've worked with a couple friends of mine. Do you want an introduction? I make that introduction using the double opt-in or whatever, and you're happy, they're happy. And I don't go, good, now Jeremy owes me one. I'm going to ask him to buy my microphone that I'm selling. I don't do that. I just give. I don't worry about getting something in return. And that keeps me from keeping score, which is what poisons a lot of relationships, where you keep score and you think someone owes you one, and it's a covert contract, right? They don't know.
Do not keep score. What does that mean?
Yeah. Do not keep score is like, let's say that I drive you to the airport 3 times and then you can't drive me to the airport because you're busy. Then I'm like, I secretly hate you. And I'm like, what a taker. This guy's such an a-hole. I'm offended. And then I'm treating you poorly. And you're like, I thought Jordan and I were friends, but now he's like treating me poorly. And he like didn't show up to my birthday party, even though he said he was going to. Like, what's happening? I poisoned the well because I've been keeping score, right? Yeah. Like, look, if somebody borrows money from you and doesn't pay you back and then does it again and again, they're a taker. They're going to be a problem. You can cut them out of your life. But if I introduce you to somebody who designs your website, and then I introduce you to somebody that ends up being a great commercial cleaning service, you don't owe me anything, right? Because I don't have an expectation of getting something in return. And you can help 100 people, and if 10 of them help you back or one of them helps you back, that's a good ROI. Because all I'm doing is making introductions. I'm doing something that's scalable. I'm doing something that doesn't really cost me anything, and I'm earning referral currency or social capital on both sides of the equation. Yes. So I don't really care if you're able to quote unquote pay me back. And thinking about somebody needing to pay you back is bad news because it poisons the relationships. So you want to make sure that you are ABG and you are not keeping score, because as soon as you start doing that, you end up ruining your own relationships. And that's kind of a shame, because you're working so hard to dig the well before you get thirsty. The last thing you should be doing is also screwing up the relationships that you have.
All right. So, hey, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. Where can our listeners learn more about you and your training? How can they get involved with you?
Yeah. So right now I'm at the Jordan Harbinger show. That's where I interview everybody from the late, great Kobe Bryant to Ray Dalio to Eric Schmidt from Google. And so I would love it if people tuned in to the Jordan Harbinger show. It's one of the most popular podcasts in the world. I'd like to think that's for a good reason. And I also have the 6-Minute Networking, which is sort of a civilian version of what I teach to special forces and intelligence agencies. And it's perfect for salespeople, and it's free. There's no upsells. You don't have to enter your credit card. It's great for advanced, but it's really, really good, especially also for people who are in the middle. That's at jordanharbinger.com/course. So jordanharbinger.com/course. And the show is, of course, in any podcast app, Spotify, or at jordanharbinger.com.
Jordan, can't thank you enough for being on the show. We will talk to you soon. That was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Now, if you're serious about joining the top 1%, I mean the top 1%, and you want to experience more training content just like this, click the links right over there. Right over there, they're exactly what you need to see next. You see, I release new episodes featuring top salespeople and sales authorities, multiple 6-figure, high 6-figure, even 7-figure earners every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday every single week at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you're new here, do yourself a favor and smash that subscribe button right below, and join our new Facebook group, Sales Revolution. You see, it's free, and there's a link in the description below just for you. We put it there for you. Finally, I make posts on Facebook and Instagram each and every day with more tips and training. So be sure and follow me and turn on your notifications. So make a comment in the first 7 minutes to any of my latest posts, share this episode, and there's a very real chance that you're gonna win some killer prizes. And here's the thing, don't sit on the sidelines. Don't be like everyone else. Get into the game. Join the sales revolution. Stay active, get involved, learn the right skills, and we will show you how to take your life and income to a level that most only dream about. Stay safe. Talk to you soon.